Today it's time to read Chapter 4 from the Science of Getting Rich Noted Integration Edition. The first principle in the Science of Getting Rich. Thought is the only power which can produce tangible riches from the formless substance. The stuff from which all things are made is a substance which thinks, and a thought of form in this substance produces the form. Original substance moves according to its thoughts. Every form and process you see in nature is the visible expression of a thought in the original substance. As the formless stuff thinks of a form, it takes that form. As it thinks of a motion, it makes that motion. That is the way of all things were created. You live in a thought world which is part of a thought universe. The thought of a moving universe extended throughout formless substance, and the thinking stuff moving according to that thought took the form of a system of planets and maintains that form. Thinking substance takes the form of its thought and moves according to the thought. Holding the idea of a circling system of suns and worlds, it takes the form of those bodies and moves them as it thinks. Thinking that the form of a slow growing oak tree, it moves accordingly and produces the tree. Thought, though centuries may be required to do the work. In creating the formless seems to move according to the lines of motion it has established. The thought of an oak tree does not cause the instant formation of a full-grown tree, but does start in motion the forces which will produce the tree along established lines of growth. Here we have a section called the work. Okay, idea may seem a little far out, so to simplify it, consider that in order to create something, you must think of the thing you want first, right? You think of a smoothie, then you make the smoothie, and it tastes good because you thought of all the things you'd like to put in there. And riches and wealth come to those who create things that others value. Therefore, thought, creation, riches. You might be thinking to yourself, well, this is all great, but I don't have any good thoughts or ideas. In that case, simply focus on the desire consistently for a long enough time, and the ideas will come your way. So, as a separate, unrelated thing to the science of getting rich, I watched a YouTube video where the guy was talking about sitting down and coming up with 20 ideas every single day. And he said it might be hard to come up with 20 ideas every day, but the process of just sitting down and thinking about ideas, they would come to you faster as you practiced the exercise, if you will. And then he said that some days might be harder than others to come up with that amount, but I think that paired with this section, you'll eventually come up with some ideas to, get you from that thought to creating something to getting the riches. And not all your ideas might be good, but the practice of sitting there and writing out some ideas, you'll be able to then think about your ideas and say, okay, well, this one might not go anywhere, but this one might. And, if you see one continue to show up when you're doing this exercise, maybe there might be something to it. So now back to the science of getting rich. Every thought of form held in thinking substance causes a creation of form, but always, or at least generally, along the lines of growth and action already established. The thought of a house of a certain construction, if it were impressed upon formless substance, might not cause the instant formation of the house, but it would cause the turning of creative engines already working in trade and commerce in such channels as a result in the speedy building of the house. And if there were no existing channels which the creative energy could work, then the house would be formed directly from primal substance without waiting for the slow process of an organic and inorganic world. And another section that's called Read Aloud. No thought of form can be impressed upon original substance without causing the creation of the form. Man is a thinking center and can originate thought. All the forms that man fashions with his hands must first exist in his thought. He cannot shape a thing until he has thought of that thing. And so far, man has confined his efforts wholly to the work of his hands. He has applied manual labor to the world of forms, seeking to change or modify those already existing. And that might be to the extent that most people can only conceptualize what's in front of them. So, yes, people invent things every day. The Wright brothers obviously were able to create the first manned flight, and then over time, things like the space shuttle showed up, which was basically just a plane that could go to space. So things that might not have been around decades or centuries before get created, but not everyone thinks like that, like, oh, we don't have a plane, we're going to create a plane. Oh, we don't have a way to get to the moon, we're going to create a spaceship that's going to take us there. Not everyone thinks that way. That's why, it says here, man has confined his efforts wholly to the work of his hands. It's hard to think beyond working with our hands if we don't have that inventor mind. He has never thought of trying to cause the creation of new forms by impressing his thought upon formless substance. When man has a thought form, he takes material from the form of nature and makes an image of the form which is in his mind. He has, so far, made little or no effort to cooperate with formless intelligence, to work with the Father. He has not dreamed that he can do what he sees the Father doing. Man reshapes and modifies existing forms by manual labor. He has given no attention to the question whether he may not produce things from formless substance by communicating his thoughts to it. We propose to prove that he may do so, to prove that any man or woman may do so, and to show how. As our first step, we may lay down 3 fundamental propositions. First, we assert that there is original formless stuff or substance from which all things are made. All seeming all the seemingly many elements are but different presentation of one element. All the many forms found in organic and inorganic nature are but different shapes, made from the same stuff. And this stuff is thinking stuff. A thought held in it produces the form of the thought. Thought in thinking substance produces shape. Man is a thinking center capable of organic thought. If man can communicate his thought to original substance, he can cause creation or formation of the thing he thinks about. To summarize, and before it's the summary, we have a gray box here that says read aloud. There is a thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which in its original state permeates, penetrates, and fills the inner spaces of the universe. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imagined by thought. Man can form things in his thought, and by impressing his thought upon formless substance, can cause the thing he thinks about to be created. So back to the summary part. It may be asked if I can prove these statements, and without going into detail, I answer that I can. So, both by logic and experience. Reasoning back from the phenomenon of form and thought, I come to original thinking substance, and reasoning forward from this substance, I come to man's power to cause the formation of the thing he thinks about. And we have a gray box that says contemplation. Science has now shown that all matter is made up of energy, vibrating at a specific frequency. Though there are also energy vibrating at a specific frequency. Oh, thoughts are. There is a magnetism by which things of one frequency attract things with a similar harmonic frequency and repels that which is counter to it. So, the contemplation box basically describes the law of attraction in a more scientific terms kind of way. And by experiment, I find that reasoning true, and this is my strongest proof. If one man who reads this book gets rich by doing what it tells him to do, that evidence is support of my claim. But if every man who does what it tells him to do gets rich, that is positive proof until someone gets through the process and fails. The theory is true until the process fails, and this process will not fail for every man who does exactly what this book tells him to do will get rich. Now, it might sound like, you could fail, but I feel like some of the principles and actions are purposely left vague, so you have to read and reread and study this to really be able to apply this and, eventually get rich. That's why in previous videos I've mentioned studying this. You have to really dive deep into this book to become rich, and most people aren't willing to put in that kind of work of just going deep on something. They aren't most people aren't even willing to, read a book like this, let alone, read it multiple times and trying to, understand it at a deeper level. I have said that men get rich by doing things in a certain way, and in order to do so, men must become able to think in a certain way. Read out loud. A man's way of doing things is the direct result of the way he thinks about things. To do things in a certain way you want to do them, you have to think, or you will have to acquire the ability to think the way you want to think. This is the first step towards getting rich. Read out loud. To think what you want to think is to think truth, regardless of appearance. Every man has a natural and inherent power to think what he wants to think, but it requires far more effort to do so than it does to think the thoughts which are suggested by appearances. To think according to appearances is easy. To think truth regardless of appearances is laborious and requires the expenditure of more power than any other work the man is called upon to perform. And we have another box here that is called the work. This is a skill that takes time and patience to master. You may start out and have a backlog of negative thoughts of lack and disbelief, but that's okay. The more you focus on the desire and potentially the more positive thoughts you will attract, and you will develop new habits of thought. By patience with yourself, there is no need to freak out if you have had a bad thought. It doesn't mean bad things are coming. Simply see the thought, acknowledge it, and follow it with a thought of what you desire. So that might seem kind of like frou-frou positive thinking, but really it's providing you with a method to, fix your thinking so that, you're not attracting more bad stuff to you through the law of attraction. If you shift your way of thinking from negative to positive instead of scarcity, fear, poverty, you're going to have prosperity and abundance. There's no labor form which there's no labor from which most people shrink as they do from that of sustained and consecutive thought. It is the hardest work in the world. This is especially true when truth is contrary to appearances. Every appearance in the visible world tends to produce a corresponding form in the mind which observes it, and this can only be prevented by holding the thought of the truth. To look upon the appearance of disease will produce the form of disease in your own mind, and ultimately in your body, unless you hold the thought of the truth, which is there are no disease. It's only an appearance, and the reality is health. To look upon the appearance of poverty would produce corresponding forms in your own mind, unless you hold the truth that there is no poverty, there is only abundance. To think health when surrounded by the appearance of disease, or to think riches when in the midst of appearances of poverty requires power. But he who acquires this power becomes a mastermind. He can conquer fate, he can have whatever he wants. This power can only be acquired by getting a hold of the basic fact which is behind all appearances. And that fact is that there is one thinking substance from which and by which all things are made. Then we must grasp the truth that every thought held in this substance becomes a form, and that man can so impress his thought upon it as to cause them to take form and become visible things. When we realize this, we lose all doubt and fear, for we know that we can create what we want to create. We can get what we want to have and can become what we want to be. As a first step towards getting rich, you must believe the three fundamental statements given previously in this chapter. And in order to emphasize them, I repeat them here. We have a read out loud box. There is this thinking stuff for which all things are made, and which in its original state permeates, penetrates, and fills the inner spaces of the universe. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imagined by thought. Man can form things in his thought, and by impressing his thought upon formless substance, can cause the thing he thinks about to be created. And then after the read aloud box, there's another box called the work. Just the fact that you're reading this is putting your mind in a place of thinking more thoughts of positivity, faith, belief, and abundance. The trick is to be consistent and keep increasing your focus and faith. And that's why, I recommend reading and rereading, studying this book so much, is because by, reading and studying this, you're, coming to a place of thinking about positivity, faith, belief, and abundance, and you keep increasing your focus on faith. You must lay aside all other concepts of the universe other than this monistic one, and you must dwell upon this until it is fixed in your mind and has become your habitual thought. Read these creed statements over and over again. Fix every word upon your memory and meditate upon them until you firmly believe what they say. If a doubt comes to you, cast it aside as sin. Do not listen to arguments against this idea. Do not go to churches or lectures where a contrary concept of things is taught or preached. Do not read magazines or books which teach a different idea. If you get mixed up in your faith, all your effort will be in vain. Do not ask why these things are true, nor speculate as to how they can be true. Simply take them on trust. The science of getting rich begins with the absolute acceptance of faith. And then at the end of the chapter, there's a box that has a quote. Earl Nightingale said it best. You get what you think about the most of the time. Which is why, if you're thinking about getting rich by studying the science of getting rich, you're bound to get rich eventually. And then at the very end of the chapter is an exercise with some space to write if you choose to write in the book versus writing in a notebook. Exercise. List times in my life where I had a strong desire for something. I gave it your full focus and faith, and I eventually received it. So, this is kind of a good exercise for um, kind of seeing where the principles in this book can be applied, and then um, seeing how you can apply them in the future. So hopefully you found some value in this and keep checking back for some more The Science of Getting Rich videos. Also, I, in the near future, plan to go back to doing some more business and entrepreneurial related videos in addition to The Science of Getting Rich. So thanks and have a good day.